Inhuman, Part 4, Chapter 12, The Shadow of Death. Rachel sat with Tom near the creek, well hidden by the old trees. The sweet smell of late-blooming flowers tickled their noses, and the soft rays of the sun warmed their skin as well as their hearts. They talked of future plans. They laughed, and Rachel never felt so at home before. Lena just left minutes ago. The trio and the retriever were almost glued together. Though Lena made sure to remove herself from the premises every now and then, Rachel knew she had to leave soon, at least for some time, to finish high school and to help Lena follow her heart. And she herself found it a little surprising, wanted to return to this little piece of tranquility. Her nightmares had stopped, and while the experience of her declaration had her rattled for a while, she explained it away, reasoning that a mild hallucinogenic effect, miasma oozing from the candles, could easily explain everything. That, and the piety of the community, led her mind to strange places. She hadn't seen any threatening shadows for weeks now, and couldn't wait to show her homeworld to Lena. Lena and Daisy nearly returned home. The girl and her dog were frolicking without a care, picking flowers along the way. She was counting down the days before she could go off-world, before she could see all the wonders of the galaxy outside the tiny corner of her home. They planned everything to the smallest detail. Nothing could go wrong, she thought, especially after tempers were calmed following Rachel's declaration. Lena waved to Mr. Stevenson, who was collecting mushrooms, and that was when she heard the first screams. She had no time to be frightened, nor could she investigate what was happening. A grey object landed in front of her as if it had fallen from a tree like a ripe fruit. Lena did not know what it was. She looked at it curiously, but Daisy smelled danger and jumped in front of her friend. The efforts of the furry protector were in vain. A shrapnel from the exploding grenade struck the girl in the stomach, and she fell to the ground. Daisy was mangled too, and the faithful dog crawled to her owner for comfort, each move further sapping her strength. Lena raised her head, her ears ringing like 1,000 bells. She didn't yet feel the pain, only that she could barely move, that she mustn't look down. Daisy reached her and nuzzled her friend one last time. Lena caressed the soft coat she combed every morning, cradling her loyal companion, covering her like the dog had done so a minute earlier. Daisy went with a whimper, and pain finally washed over Lena. Tears pooled and streaked down her messy face. Heavy boots stopped beside her, and she felt a cruel foot on her right shoulder, the oncoming kick turning her over, pushing her away from her beloved pet.
Please, it's my fault. I betrayed the master. Please, don't hurt my friends for what I did. Spare them, please. Take me instead.
She begged the unseen enemy, whose gaze she felt upon her skin, but whom she could not see. The heavy steps walked away, leaving her in the pooling blood. Lena caressed Daisy's coat one last time and stared into the sky she wanted to visit so much. It gave her a sliver of strength. She had to get away from this nightmare. The screams and gunshots clearly stated she couldn't do anything for the village, but could still warn Rachel and Tom. Rachel promised she would take her away no matter what. She would save her, and Lena's feverish mind convinced her body to move. It took her all to get up on her knees, then to her feet, and she stumbled back towards their spot at the creek. Each step was excruciating. Each forced a more agonizing breath than the previous one, and each chipped away from her hopes of a miraculous escape. Back in the village, some of the younger children laughed at something in the tea room. This scared the older ones, so they searched for an adult. Peter was in the next room, and they dragged him to the little ones.
What is it, you rascals?
He asked with his signature smile. The kids pointed outside.
There are empty clothes moving in the air. We know you did it somehow, Uncle Peter.
The older children swore that they saw nothing of the sort. Peter expected some trickery from either side, so he walked to the window with a grin. He looked out of the window and into the empty street. He saw not a single soul out there, but he saw large and deep footsteps in the fresh dirt, still wet after last night's rain. The blood went cold in his veins.
All right, kids. We will play a game, hide and seek. You will go through the back door, tell the elders what we play, and then hide. Ready?
They rushed out, and Peter searched for something heavy. A bat was leaning against the cupboard, and he grabbed it with shaky hands. In the mirror, he saw the door slowly open, and he saw it close the same way, without anyone entering. Yet, the old hardwood floorboards creaked under a weight. He could feel the gaze of something that shouldn't be on the back of his head, and all the hair on his arms rose. He shut his eyes, took a breath, and swung the bat as he turned. He hit nothing. He swung again, and again. And a terrible force stopped the bat in the air. He couldn't pull it back, and he couldn't see who or what held it in place. Then something struck him in the side, and he bent over. Peter yelped. Pain and fear rushed through him, and he shed a tear. The invisible enemy wrenched the bat from his hands and struck him across the back. He fell to the ground, but not for long, as the unseen force raised him from the floor, grabbed the back of his head, and smashed it against the mirror until there was nothing left of his face but a bloody pulp. Peter's limp body fell to the ground. All over the village, similar scenes of horror played out. The peaceful community was under attack, and the people couldn't even see their murderers. Screams filled the air, and the attackers abandoned stealth. Their guns began to sing, and these notes spared no one. Rachel and Tom were roused from their serenity. They heard the explosions and rushed to check on the village. Soon they ran into the grievously injured Elena. The girl cradled her belly. Her clothes and light brown hair were drenched in blood. Lena barely clung to life. She didn't want to flee anymore. She just wanted to lay down and sleep, but she had to warn them first. She staggered into Rachel's arms and whispered,
They kill everyone. It's my fault. The master punishes us for my betrayal. I'm sorry.
She sighed, dying in her friend's arms. Rachel held Lena in shock, cradling her head as if she was just ill or asleep. She begged her friend to wake up. Her tears watered the light brown crown, and she refused to let go. Tom had to shake her to her senses. He gently lowered Lena's body to the ground and pointed above the tree line.
We have to run. The enemy came for us,
Tom whispered, tears welling in his eyes. The teens saw the smokes rise in the distance. They ran fast, back towards the creek and deep into the woods. Somewhere along the way, they lost sight of each other. Rachel looked back when she reached an open area, and as she turned, she tripped over something. She sat up, saw a group of dark-clad warriors, and let out a hopeful sigh.
Lightnings, thank goodness.
The Halcyons looked at the captain for direction. This was new. The captain stepped closer to the girl, his hand resting on his knife. He stepped to the left, then to the right. Rachel's big brown eyes followed his movements, but she did not understand the meaning of this strange ritual. She examined their faces, but couldn't see much, for mist like dark visors shrouded them. The realization hit her, and she gasped. She had seen such a mask before, and the dark figures too. They were the ones stalking the village. Those sightings weren't the master's ominous warnings. The lightnings must have been expecting the attack, watching from a distance, she thought. They couldn't have been the ones to. The captain made another sudden sidestep.
What are you doing?
She asked.
Rachel.
Tom screamed her name.
I'm here. There are lightnings too.
She yelled to him. Then she turned back to the warriors.
You must hurry, my friend is badly hurt. You have to save her, please. They attacked the village. I don't know who, must be pirates or...
She begged, refusing to accept that Lena was gone, and refusing to believe the lightnings would hurt innocent people. She had heard their tales ever since she was a toddler. Their glories were shared all over the news, and during history classes, they spoke of the great defenders of humanity who would always come to the rescue of the defenseless. The captain bent down and reached his hand towards the girl. She looked at the glove-covered hand, then the dark mask of the Halcyon. 5 veteran warriors watched her every move, every blink of her eyes. Rachel began to feel nauseous. Then Tom arrived. He was panting after the long run and leaned against a tree.
Rachel, Tom, did you see any more lightnings?
She asked, suspicion like a dark mist clouding her mind.
Any more? Light, what are you talking about?
He was terrified and grieved for his family.
These guys?
She yelled and pointed at the dark-clad warriors.
Not the red ones, the phoenixes. They are from one of the smaller groups.
She looked at the captain, then at the familiar-looking bird on his chest. She had seen it many times before, although this one was only a simple, motionless white contour.
Halcyons.
Tom wiped sweat and tears from his eyes with his sleeve and stared at the empty clearing. He saw no one else but Rachel. He shook his head.
Keep it together, Ray. Just a little bit more. We need to keep moving. We have to hide until it's over.
The lad said, holding back his tears.
You can't see them.
Rachel's voice cracked.
Why can't you see them?
She demanded. Finally, a dull voice answered her dilemma.
Get the girl out of here. We will sort this out later.
Tom stepped back, and his eyes opened wide as an unseen force lifted Rachel into the air, taking her away with haste. Then he heard heavy footsteps close in on him. He yelled and swung his fist, trying to rush after Rachel. A stone-like fist nailed him in the stomach. It shattered his jaw next, sending him helpless to the ground. The Halcyon ran with Rachel in his arms, the girl's weight barely slowing him down. The dark warrior rushed without pause, without showing signs of fatigue, and they soon reached an area unfamiliar to Rachel. As they passed a tree line, he suddenly stopped and put Rachel to the ground. There was movement in front of them, a bush shaking. The Halcyon hid behind a tree and readied his gun. Soon an uninjured Elena emerged. She looked at her friend.
Rachel, are you all right? Something horrible is happening.
She sobbed, but no tears ran down her cheeks. She looked different, her hair maybe, or...
Lena, I saw you. I saw.
Rachel muttered, her voice cracking. She didn't know how to say it.
I saw you die.
She spat finally, through the trembling of her voice. Her doe eyes were welling up again. She wanted to believe that Lena lived, but nary 15 minutes passed since she saw the poor girl lifeless on the ground.
What? I'm here, and we need to get out of here. Come on,
she implored, but Rachel didn't move.
Come on, Rachel. There is a shuttle nearby. How do you know that?
She asked, tears streaking her face.
We have one for emergencies. Don't you remember? Come on, Rachel. It's me. I know you remember how at first I thought you couldn't last a month, that I hated you. But after the blooming, we stole the oranges and became friends. You are my friend, Rachel. We have to leave.
There was something in her voice, something demanding. Something that wasn't quite Elena. Rachel tried to think through her days. She felt Lena fade away in her arms, her breath leaving her. But what if it was someone else? A glimmer of hope flickered in her soul. What if she mistook a different girl for her friend? She must have. Lena stood not 10 yards from her, and she was whole, not a scratch on her, not even a smidge of dirt on her clothes. And where was Tom? Maybe the Halcyons. No, she thought. It must be a dream. They were the defenders of humanity. They wouldn't hurt them. She just had to wake up somehow. As if on cue, Elena reached out her hand and smiled at her. But something was wrong with that smile, as if she had smiled with a stranger's lips.
How did we become friends?
Rachel asked. For a moment, Elena's gentle face was twisted into a mask of rage, but it went away in an instant and was replaced with a wide smile. This smile was a good lie, not one of Lena's transparent fibs, but it was wholly unnatural. The form was there, but not the spirit.
I forgave you.
Whatever pretended to be, Elena beamed.
You came here, you intruded on my world with your alien ways, but I forgave you.
The facade dropped for a moment, and Lena's face took on a puzzled grimace.
You dropped me into the bowl of apples because I hate apples and I forgave you for that.
The puzzlement turned into certainty once more.
I forgave you for that. And look, Daisy is here too. You love Daisy.
A small white sheep emerged from the bushes, the exact replica of Polly. Rachel pulled away, slowly crawling backwards in the undergrowth, her eyes fixed on the imposter. Elena's face again turned into a furious scowl, and she yelled in a shrill tone.
Don't you dare walk away from me. I am your friend. It is almost funny how little you care for your slaves.
A listless voice darted from nearby. Before Rachel could turn around, the creature taking on Elena's form went through a horrid transformation. Her face caved in, giving place to a sea of teeth and fangs. Her formerly slender form was twisted into bulbs of flesh, and as it crawled towards the voice, it spat shards of bone in its direction. The creature reached the tree, but the warrior slipped away. A small explosion then went off, but it only enraged the monster. It lashed out, clawing at its invisible enemy. Rachel screamed. Her stupor finally wore off as she had to face the fact that she was not dreaming. She was awake in a nightmare. Strong hands grabbed her, and she was pulled behind a great ash tree. She heard something heavy crashing into the trunk, but the great wood stood strong. The dark mask of the Halcyon stared at her.
When I give you the signal, you will run. The extraction point is half a mile to the north. Follow the tree line past that great rock.
He pointed somewhere down the road.
I will handle the rest.
Rachel looked at the little white bird on his chest and nodded. The warrior jumped out of cover and opened fire at the beast. He drew it away, and soon another explosion rocked the forest, which she understood as the signal. She ran as fast as her legs took her, not looking back at the thing that once may have been her friend, nor at the warrior who fought to save her. She ran past the great rock and did not stop until a rough hand grabbed her by the throat and pushed a gun to her head.
No, Halcyon. How?
He squeezed the words through her compressed throat. The warrior let her go and played the step left, step right game with her, the same as the captain before. She followed his moves, careful not to look away even for a second. 4 veterans watched every blink of her eyes.
Good enough for me. For now.
The Halcyon ushered her into the shuttle when great shadows covered the sun. Rachel looked at the shadow play on the ground. Large tendrils waved, they raged, and for a moment she thought she saw what was happening without looking with her eyes. The master called to her. She tried to turn around, but the warrior tossed her into the flyer. A moment later, he also entered and quickly covered her eyes with his hands.
You came so far, girl. Do not peek now.
The Halcyon spoke in the same flat tone as his comrades before. The shuttle took off with them, and Rachel saw through her closed eyes, through the firm covering hand of the Halcyon. She saw her murdered friends. She saw as they lay on the ground, felled by man-made wounds. She saw Peter, beaten to a bloody pulp, Elena, her stomach rent open, and Tom, the poor lad, torn apart and burned by the dark warriors. No one was spared by the rampage of the Halcyons, the unseen enemy. But why was she? She also saw how the master raged, how he fought his unseen enemy. She felt his hunger and his despair. As his reach shortened, she felt the terrible gaze of his eyes taking notice of her gawking. Then the horror lunged at her. Chapter 13. No more than tools. The Halcyons fought their enemy as they always had. With fire and steel, with lead and flame, with dispassionate cruelty, they severed the anchors, save for a select few, not pausing to think of the lives they took. Their duty shall be done, as it always had been, as it always will be. Blood and death reigned in the little village. The woods around burned, and flame kept the monstrosity at bay. The dark intelligence animating the roiling flesh could not defeat the Halcyons. Their ears were closed to the whispers. They could not be threatened, frightened, or bargained with. No bribe, nor treasure would they accept. No promise of salvation, nor threat of damnation would they heed. They had but one purpose. They were tools, recruited from humanity's finest warriors and turned into cold-blooded monsters. Only they could wage this war. The shadow lashed out in a blind fury, for it could not see its enemies. Finally, the sound of carnage subsided. The guns went silent, save for the growl of the flamethrowers, and the Halcyons gathered around the mound of flesh that still tried to break away. 4 of the elders were with the dark warriors. Brown sacks covered their heads, hiding their master from their eyes. The general stepped behind one of them and removed the sack. It was Moret. He forced her to look at the object of her worship. Moretti screamed, for not even she had seen the master in its full unholy glory before. The physical form of the monstrosity was terrible enough to scar a soul for life, but it was the foul presence radiating from the mound that broke her. She screamed for minutes until her vocal cords were severed from the sheer effort. Her screaming continued without a sound. The general pulled the crimson crystal from his pocket and placed it in Moret's hands. Her skin blistered and burned. The blood tear washed away tissue and flesh until nothing but the bones remained, even those quickly charred and blackened. He then raised the stone high in his hand and walked up to the mountain of putrid flesh. It could not see the general, no matter how many eyes it had, but it could see the tear. Its crimson shine was more painful than the kiss of the flamethrowers. The general closed in and the shadow retreated in fear and hatred. The man nodded.
The crone was right.
He turned to the 2 warriors beside him.
Send word to the High Command. We have our new training world.
He gave the order, and the first man left. Next, he looked at the elders.
Prepare the anchors. They will be here for a while.
The second man took away the remaining elders. He then scanned the battlefield, observing the destruction all around. The general waved over the captain.
It seems that some of our ranks had become susceptible to the presence of the enemy. How so?
The captain asked.
Anchors were left on the ground bleeding. Mercy kills denied. This is the first sign. It cannot be tolerated. I want you to conduct an investigation. Those who can be salvaged will be retrained here. Purge the rest.
Chapter 14. Answers. The captain led Rachel to a silvery metal table, gently pushed her onto a chair, and poured her a cup of tea. It was steaming hot, and he added a bit of rum for flavor.
Here,
he said.
This will make you feel better. You killed them all. You killed everyone. Lena, Peter, Tom, all the poor people. We killed the animals too.
The captain added.
It could not be helped. They grow too close to us. Well, not us. You.
Rachel was taken aback by the raw acknowledgement. She hoped for denial, for an explanation that pirates, slavers, or other monsters attacked her adoptive home, and not the heroes of humanity. Pushing through pain, fear, and exhaustion, she yelled.
So what are you waiting for? Why are you taking me on a trip before you kill me? We will not kill you.
Rachel laughed. It was a short and raspy outburst. Her face was soaked by tears, but she was too tired to keep crying.
Right. We have no reason to. You did not give in. You saved yourself.
She looked at the halcyon. His face was still covered by that strange dark mask that cloaked his eyes and nose.
I will tell the truth to everyone.
She didn't know why she said that. Did she want to die?
You are free to do so.
The halcyon sat down on the chair opposite to Rachel.
But before you do that, tell me, what do you think is the truth? You murdered innocents. We did. We often do.
The halcyon poured himself a cup of tea. He didn't add rum to his own. He waited for Rachel to continue. No warmth came from him, but no hostility either. The calm manner of the hero-turned-monster unsettled Rachel. If he didn't deny his deeds, she wanted him to gloat, or to explain himself at least, but his voice was aloof and dispassionate. She took a raspy breath and pondered over the events of the past months. All strange things that happened in the village. The master and the halcyon in her dreams. She took a shaky breath.
You didn't. Youth Master is real,
she whispered.
Do not call it Master.
The halcyon's voice was dull even when issuing a warning.
You are not a slave, and it cannot take you against your will. Not while its presence is weak anyway. We call it the shadow.
She stared at him, not ready to believe his words. Could it be that he was fabricating a tale to make her shut up? It didn't make sense. They could have just killed her back in the village with the others. She wanted to think the cause of the bizarre dreams was her sensitivity to iter travel. That her friends told those strange things to her because they followed the strict doctrines of their community. That the weird happenings had mundane explanations. But after seeing the monster that mimicked poor Elena, she could no longer fool herself.
What is it?
She asked.
The enemy. The only true enemy. Our very existence causes endless suffering to the shadow, so it wants to take us all, to make us all part of itself. It wants to be the only one to be, the only thing left in all of existence, and its presence is the end of us. To gaze upon it is to invite madness. Those who dull their minds shatter to save them from comprehending the truth. But you looked at it. I saw. Yes, our training prepares us to face the enemy. I will spare you the details, but I can assure you it is not a pleasant process. Even our benevolent precursors were horrified when they learned of our methods, and they are intimately familiar with the shadow.
Rachel took a sip of her tea. She did not want to accept the words of the halcyon, but she could feel the truth in them. She played with her blonde locks. The sweat from her hand made her hair tangled and messy. So the mass. The shadow wasn't the making of her mind, the projection of a strict community. And the caring image of the shadow was but a well-constructed facade. The impatience, the hunger and the malevolence it radiated was the truth. Lena must have felt it too, but she was unable to run away on her own. Before it was too late.
Beauty won. You killed it, right? We merely pushed it back. It is entropy made manifest. We can destroy the flesh it possesses, but the intellect behind remains unharmed and angry. It still lurks behind our universe and will keep reaching through the cracks. And in the end, it will win. Our goal is to make this war last as long as possible.
The captain added another sip of rum to Rachel's drink. He didn't sound like someone who just described an existential threat to all who lived. His flat buzz was more fitting for a late-night infomercial. Rachel sniffed and wiped away a teardrop with her shoulder, thinking of her friends and all the innocent people wantonly murdered on the little moon. She wrapped her palms around the warm red mug.
Couldn't you save them? They didn't deserve this, if you are telling the truth. Poor Lena, she wanted to leave so badly. Just a few days. Why couldn't you wait a few days? Take off your mask, please. It's terrifying to look at.
The Halcyon gazed at her, his mouth clumsily contorted into a pitying smile. He was a terrible liar. He hadn't practiced for a very long time.
It was too late for them, and I am not wearing a mask.
Rachel stared into the mist like black visor, scanning the place where the warrior's eyes should have been. Something came over her, maybe a flash of insanity, and she walked up to the captain to touch the mask. Her hand went right through it, for it was not there. She felt up the face of the Halcyon, his nose, his brows, his eyes which closed when her hand was near, his warm and surprisingly soft skin. It all felt normal. But all she could see was the dark mask, even when her hand rested on his cheek. Her arm dropped back to her side, and she stumbled back to her chair.
You are a very perceptive young woman, Rachel. Most people would not see us like this. In all fairness, most do not notice us at all, unless we want them to.
She tried to reconstruct the face of the captain by recalling how the touch felt. She tried to remember if he had a big or small nose, a thin or bushy eyebrow, but the memory slipped away from her like a passing dream in the morning. She stared at the dark visor, which wasn't there.
Are you even human? It is fiercely debated among those in the know.
The Halcyon's nonchalant attitude roused a new wave of anger inside Rachel, and she pointed at the captain.
You are supposed to be the defenders of humanity, but you killed my friends. You're supposed to hunt down whatever wants to hurt us, but instead you acted just like the Master Shadow, thinking you know best, taking whatever you want. You should have chased him away. You should have saved my friends.
Those last words came out with ever longer sobs as she tried to stop herself from crying. She thought of Lena again, of how badly she wanted to see the galaxy, and to be away from the Master. She realized sitting on a spaceship and leaving the little moon alone filled her with unbearable guilt.
They were people, and not monsters like that thing.
She spat. Even thinking about the creature that pretended to be Lena made her sick in the stomach.
What did your friends look like? Do you remember them?
The captain asked.
Of course I remember them,
Rachel yelled, focusing on her anger to drown out grief and fear.
What about their eyes? What did their eyes look like? Their colors, their shapes?
The warrior continued. Rachel scoffed. Of course she remembered. She closed her eyes and thought of Peter. She could clearly see his face in her mind's eye. The round head, the rusty hair and beard, his crooked nose and ever-beaming smile. His eyes. She forced herself to remember his eyes, but it was as if something shrouded it, denying her from unveiling the truth. She thought of Tom next. Broad shoulders, tall forehead, his wide yet shapely lips. But she looked in vain for his eyes. It almost drew her mad. She was just staring into them a few hours ago. Lena came next to her mind. Rachel could see her friend's slender frame, as if she stood right in front of her. She saw her soft, wavy light brown crown, snub nose, and gentle face, but the cursed shroud kept her eyes hidden. Rachel somehow knew that her friend had beautiful, innocent eyes, and she clawed at the veil in rage to see it one last time. To her shock, it moved, revealing black, pupilless orbs and a horrific depth within that no human mind could comprehend. Her own eyes darted open, and she looked at the dark visor of the Halcyon, fearing now that it was the Master who played a cruel game with her. The captain took a sip of tea and let Rachel gather herself.
What happens now?
The girl was utterly exhausted. The revelation of one more terrible truth would surely break her beyond repair.
We will take you home. But remember this, Rachel, you will never fully return to Kansas.
The Halcyon left her at the table. She stared into the void. Suddenly, something landed on her thighs, and it purred with a purpose. The small tabby cat locked her green eyes with Rachel's brown, pushed her body against the girl, then laid down in her lap. She was elated to cuddle up to the girl, Those halcyons didn't smell right. Rachel absent-mindedly caressed the furball, trying her best to shut down her mind. Chapter 15. Home Sweet Home. Stephen and Natasha Wilkins held each other as they watched the news. The woman buried her face in her husband's shoulder. Her long blonde hair flowed over his chest while he caressed her back. Both of them wept. The news showed the devastation that befell a little green moon orbiting a gas giant. A stray asteroid from the ring system, they said. It struck the sole village community of the moon. No survivors found. The doorbell rang. They did not care. It rang again, and Stephen pulled up the video feed from his datapad, ready to scream at the intruders though. In truth, he wanted to scream at himself. In the end, he did not scream at all. He just stared at the light-haired, brown-eyed ghost and her two dark-clad chaperons.
"Who is it?"
Natasha asked, her emerald eyes searching for the device. She looked at the feed through the veil of her tears, and she did scream as she ran to the door. She almost tore it off the hinges as she lunged at her daughter, nearly tackling her to the ground as she clutched her to her chest. Stephen joined them a moment later. All three cried. The halcyons patiently watched the reunion. 10 minutes later, they both held a glass of the finest wine of the Wilkins household, and warding off the grateful parents appeared to be a harder task than fighting the cosmic horror that threatened all of creation. They were certainly less experienced in the former. Gratitude was not something the Dark Warriors often faced. Not that it mattered to them. The captain spun a yarn, a fancy tale about how Rachel was on an errand with the shuttle of the village, how she returned to search for survivors, and how brave she was as she faced a terrible danger no one should endure. They also told the parents that they should closely monitor the mental state of their daughter, and they were kind enough to share the contact information of a professional whom they could call if they thought something was amiss. Rachel realized that the halcyons hid the truth between their lies, and she also understood that they would keep a very close watch on her. But she could not understand why they took the risk, why they spared her. Soon the halcyons left, despite the protests of the Wilkins parents, and the little family was huddling on the couch, the youngest in the middle. Something visibly bothered Rachel, but she was afraid to ask the question. If she had been deceived by the captain, her parents would think she had lost her marbles, but she had to be certain. Somehow she summoned the courage.
"The halcyons, do you remember what they looked like? Their eyes, hair, nose, anything?"
Her parents laughed. How could they forget the heroes who returned their darling daughter? They looked like they had. No, they couldn't remember. Strange. Must be the emotions. Rachel nodded. She hadn't lost her mind yet, nor did the captain and his warriors trick her.
"Mom, Dad, I would like to go to sleep. Go on, sweetie,"
Natasha said, and she did not let go of her daughter. Rachel chuckled.
"In my own bed."
They finally let her go. She walked across the lavish living room, up the stairs, and into her room. Rachel dropped her suitcase beside her bed. The halcyons gave it to her, along with a few toiletries and an extra garment belt, and after proper cleaning, they even returned to her the brown uniform she wore at the village. She fished out the brown dress and examined it carefully. There were a few stubborn black spots left, the dried blood of Lena smeared on the linen. This was all that was left of her friend, all that she could bring with her to the stars, the testament of her broken promise. She wept into the clothing. Exhaustion soon took over, and the girl fell face first into the soft bed, not caring enough to deactivate her garment. Chapter 16. The Call of the Master.
"Rachel, Rachel, Rachel?"
The master called to her. She rose from her bed, climbed down the stairs, and entered Cousin Peter's living room. She looked out the window and saw the contour of a gas giant over the horizon. She realized she was dreaming.
"Rachel, I need you, and you need me."
The master's call was too strong to resist. She walked across the room, entered the forbidden corridor, and looked for the basement door. It was open, and the master invited her downstairs.
"I know you are afraid, child. I know you want to be loved, to be cherished, and I know that you want to love without angst or doubt. I will give you this and much more. Come to me, child."
Rachel stumbled towards the basement and fell at the top of the stairs. The master's pull was irresistible. Memories came rushing back to her, of Tom, of Peter, of all the warmth and serenity and laughter. She grabbed onto the door and dragged herself up when she felt something in the pocket of her nightgown. She reached for it. It was a sticker. She thought of Lena, and a bolt of anger coursed through her soul. Rachel realized the master would have never let her friend leave his presence to follow her heart. She grabbed the door and slammed it shut with all her might. She pulled out the sticker and slapped it on the door. It was a small white bird in the shape of a halcyon. The master screamed in impotent rage. Rachel Wilkins woke up in her bed. The soft sunlight caressed her face, and the birds sang their prettiest songs to her. She sat up with a smile on her face.